My mom hung up on me after my 15-year-old cousin accused me of essaying her in my dorm room, then blocked me and texted, "Stop contacting us, we need to heal." When I screamed, "I swear I didn't do anything to her," they coldly said, "We don't want anything to do with you." I stayed silent. That was 9 years ago. Yesterday, cousin texted, "I think I had a dream and got confused," and hasn't eaten since. Cousin falsely accused me of SA. Now my family is finally contacting me after almost 10 years. I grew up in what was probably the most normal of normal households. Parents worked a lot, but still managed to care for me and my 3 older sisters. We were never super close as a family, but never had any issues either. Same goes for my extended family. They always lived a few hours away, but we saw each other during summer holidays or Christmas, and always got along great. But when we got older, we naturally grew apart as everyone had their own lives. I'm 31 now. In 2014, when I was 22 and attending university, I got a phone call from my mother that turned my life upside down. I remember I didn't even answer at first because I was gaming with friends, but she called again immediately after the first call. This was an unwritten rule in the family. If you call twice like that, it's important. Like someone died important. So when she called again, I excused myself and answered, only to hear chaos in the other end, like people were arguing. But when my mom realized I had answered, it sounded like she went to another room and closed the door. I just asked what was going on, and I heard she was crying. My memory of this conversation is a bit blurry, but she basically asked if I had something to confess regarding E. E is my cousin on my mom's side and is 7 years younger than me, 15 at the time. At that point, I hadn't seen E for several years. I just said no and asked what this was about. She cried harder and accused me of SA and E when we were children. E had told my sister that when she was 9 and I 16, she'd been playing in my room when I came in and started feeling her under her clothes and kissing her. My mother screamed at me to say something, but I couldn't speak. It was absurd. I remember thinking it must be some bad joke. I said it wasn't true and that E was lying. But my mom kept saying that E gave such a detailed description of where and how. She kept asking, "Did you do this?" And I just screamed back no each time. It ended with my parents saying they didn't want anything to do with me and never to contact them again. 2 of my sisters texted me later that day, saying I'm disgusting, then blocked me. After that call, I had a long shower. After calming down, I started calling and texting everyone, even E. No one answered, and those who hadn't blocked me quickly did. The only response was from my father, who texted me to stop contacting them and that they needed to heal. That was 9 years ago, and I haven't spoken to anyone in my family since. This completely destroyed me. I was living in a haze for weeks and hardly ate. It didn't help that this was right before my bachelor's thesis defense. Luckily, my co-writer sensed something was wrong and saved me during the defense. Without him, I would have failed. No one came to my graduation. Then started the worst period of my life. I spent the first year expecting the cops to arrest me for sexual abuse. I didn't land any jobs, just lived off my savings. I drank a lot and did oxy. I grew resentful and violent, though fortunately no one was around to hurt. My neighbor called the cops once after I smashed a glass, but I convinced them I'd just dropped it. Instead of sleeping, I spent nights planning how I could hurt E and make sure no one found out, even thinking how I could actually do the thing she'd accused me of, but worse. I'm not proud of that. I landed my first real job in my field in late 2015. Only then did things improve. I focused on work as it gave me something normal to do. Recovery was slow, but I drank less and smiled more. I lived cheap and earned good money, so I made a point of buying myself nice birthday gifts, a VR headset, a motorcycle, Lego. Last year I moved from my rundown apartment and bought a small house with a garage and garden, an old dream of mine. This has boosted me even more. My life is okay now, though I still have problems. I've been on antidepressants for years. They help, but not in a happy way. They just replace dark thoughts with dead ones. My trust in people is nearly non-existent. I've only been on 2 dates. It's hard to speak normally, and what would I tell a potential partner about my family? The only woman I really talk to is my therapist. A few days ago, I received a text from my mother. It felt unreal, and I stared at the notification for an hour before opening it. Yesterday, a second text followed. Translated, they basically said, "Hi, it's been so long since we talked. We miss you and want to know how you're doing." She wrote about my sisters and how my nieces and nephews are getting big. I didn't even know I was an uncle. Know that we love you and always will. The second text explained that last month, at a family gathering, E was downplaying what had happened to her. It got so awkward that she finally admitted nothing happened and that she probably just dreamt it. They were appalled. When we last spoke, they wanted to protect E and did what they thought they could do. They know that's not excusing how I was treated. What E did was wrong, and they're all angry at her. They've called everyone who knew and told them the truth. They all want to speak with me, and my sisters want me to meet their families. They asked if I could forgive them. I haven't answered, but they know I've seen it. Truth be told, I didn't know what to do. Do I ignore them and continue as is, or do I answer? And if so, what to even write? I'm pretty sure meeting them in person would be a bad idea for a foreseeable future, but I'm not even sure how my life can improve from picking up those old threads. As embarrassing as it may sound, I've dreamed about the day when they apologize to be them, throwing themselves to the ground and kissing my feet. Texting seems so anticlimactic now, but I ended up responding, and we scheduled a time for a video call. I spent the entire day preparing, not just mentally, but physically. I cleaned my house, not because they'd see it, but because I needed the routine. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until they gleamed, vacuumed every corner, and even dusted the ceiling fan that hadn't been touched in months. I showered, shaved, and put on a crisp button-up shirt I'd bought specifically for this moment. I stood before the mirror, adjusting my collar, practicing neutral expressions. Professional, composed, a stark contrast to the broken man they'd abandoned. At exactly 7 p.m., I opened my laptop and clicked the video call link I'd sent them. My heart hammered against my ribs as the connection established. The blue loading circle spun for what felt like eternity. One by one, their faces appeared on my screen. My mother and father sitting together on their living room couch. The same couch where I'd opened Christmas presents as a child, where we'd watched movies on rainy Sundays. I could see the familiar family photos on the wall behind them, including ones with me still in them. Vanessa with her husband hovering awkwardly behind her. Diane alone in what looked like a home office, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating her face. Caitlin in her kitchen, the clink of dishes in the background. And E, sitting in what appeared to be her bedroom, fingers nervously twisting a strand of hair. "Hi," my mother said, her voice breaking immediately. Her eyes were already red-rimmed, puffy. It's so good to see you. She looked older than I remembered, new lines etched around her eyes and mouth, her hair more gray than brown now. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at each of them, these strangers who shared my blood. My father couldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the camera. E was fidgeting with her sleeve, the fabric fraying under her anxious fingers. The silence stretched uncomfortably, filling the digital space between us. Thank you all for joining, I finally said, my voice steady. Practiced. It's been a long time. The words felt inadequate, absurdly formal for the situation, but they were all I could manage. What followed was 20 minutes of tearful apologies. My mother did most of the talking, occasionally nudging my father, who would grunt in agreement. My sisters chimed in with their own regrets, voices cracking. Tissues appeared as noses were blown and eyes wiped. E spoke last, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, she said. I don't know why I said those things. I think I had a dream and got confused. I was just a kid. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze through the screen. Just a kid. The words echoed in my head. I had been just a kid too, 22, my life ahead of me. My fingers gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles turning white with the effort of maintaining my composure. I understand, I said, though I didn't. These things happen. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. The relief on their faces was immediate, palpable. Their shoulders relaxed. Small smiles appeared. They thought this would be easy. They thought I was going to absolve them with a few words, a digital handshake across the void of a decade. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, I continued, my fingers tapping a steady rhythm on my desk. About the last 10 years. The tap 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 filled the brief silence. We want to make it up to you, my mother interjected, leaning forward eagerly. We've been talking about having a big family reunion. Your nieces and nephews are so excited to meet their uncle. Her voice rose with enthusiasm, as if planning a surprise party rather than addressing years of abandonment. I smiled thinly. That sounds nice, but before we move forward, I think we need to be honest with each other about everything. I reached for the glass of water I'd placed nearby, taking a slow sip to steady myself. My father shifted uncomfortably, the leather couch creaking beneath him. What do you mean? His voice was gruff, defensive. Well, I said, opening a folder on my desktop. I've been doing some research, trying to understand what happened. The folder contained dozens of files, meticulously organized and labeled. Research? Vanessa asked, her brow furrowing. She leaned closer to her camera, as if trying to see what was on my screen. Yes, for instance, Dad, I was curious why you told Uncle Robert last month that you still believe E's original story. The color drained from my father's face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I never, he started to protest. You did, I interrupted, sharing my screen to show them a transcript of a conversation between Alex and my uncle. It had taken months of careful work, creating a believable social media presence, connecting with distant family acquaintances, slowly working my way into their circles. Hours spent crafting the perfect messages, building trust, gathering information. You told him, and I quote, we're trying to bring him back into the fold, but between us, I still think something happened. Silence fell over the call. My mother turned to look at my father, shock evident on her face. The others froze, processing what they were seeing. And Mom, I continued, switching documents. You told your book club that I had mental problems, and that's why I'd been estranged. Not because you accused me of SA my cousin and cut me out of your life. The document showed screenshots of messages, dates, and times meticulously recorded. That's not, I didn't mean, she stammered, hands fluttering like trapped birds. Her face had gone pale, eyes wide with panic. Diane, I said, moving on. You never told Stephen about any of this, did you? He thinks I abandoned the family because I'm selfish. I clicked to another file, revealing more conversations, more secrets. Diane's eyes widened. How do you know what Stephen thinks? Her voice was barely audible, a shocked whisper. I ignored the question. Caitlin, you've been telling people I'm getting help for my issues. Vanessa, you told your boss I was in rehab when she asked why I wasn't at your wedding. Each revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading across their faces. They realized I somehow knew things I shouldn't, things I could only know if I'd been listening, watching, gathering. And E, I said, turning my attention to my cousin. You're applying for a promotion at Westridge Elementary. Congratulations, but you claim to have a certification in childhood development that you don't actually possess. That's fraud. My voice remained calm, matter of fact, as if discussing the weather rather than exposing lies. E's mouth fell open. How could you possibly know that? Her eyes darted around, as if looking for hidden cameras in her room. I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. I know everything. I know about Dad's gambling that nearly cost you the house in 2018, Mom. I know about Vanessa's credit card debt. I know Diane's been looking at apartments because she's thinking of leaving Stephen. I know Caitlin failed her nursing exam twice. Each revelation hit its mark, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and horror. What is this? My father demanded, finding his voice. Are you spying on us? His face had turned red, a vein pulsing at his temple. Spying implies secrecy, I replied calmly. You all spoke to me willingly. You just didn't know it was me. I switched screens again, showing them Alex Jensen's profile picture, then removed the digital alterations to reveal my face underneath. Alex Jensen, the friendly, sympathetic stranger who'd connected with them through mutual acquaintances, who'd listened to their problems, who'd become a confidant. You've all been talking to me for months, I explained, telling Alex your stories, your secrets, your lies. I could see the moment of recognition in each of their faces as they realized the extent of my deception, and theirs. The stunned silence was broken by E's gasp. Melissa, she whispered. Is she? Her voice trailed off, unable to complete the question. I nodded. Also me, Melissa, the online friend who'd bonded with E over teaching experiences, who'd encouraged her to apply for the promotion, who knew all about her relationship problems. The betrayal on their faces would have been satisfying if I could feel anything beyond the cold determination that had driven me for months. Why would you do this? My mother asked, tears streaming down her face. Her hands trembled as she wiped at her cheeks with a crumpled tissue. Why would I do this? I repeated, my composure finally cracking. You destroyed my life based on a lie, cut me off completely, and then expected a text message apology to fix it. You never once asked what happened to me, what I went through, how I survived. My voice rose with each sentence, years of pent-up anger finally finding demanding release. We're trying to make amends, Vanessa protested, her husband's hands gripping her shoulders. His face was a mask of confusion, clearly hearing some of this for the first time. No, I said firmly. You're trying to ease your guilt. There's a difference. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The familiar weight of anger settled in my chest, a companion I'd lived with for so long. I've compiled everything I've learned into a document. Every lie you've told, every contradiction, every secret. I'm going to send it to each of you after this call. I tapped a few keys, bringing up a lengthy PDF file. What are you going to do with all this? My father asked, his voice tight with anger. His initial shock had given way to defensive rage. That depends on you, I replied. I don't want your tearful reunions or your forced family dinners. I want accountability. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I outlined my terms clearly. First, they would each write detailed accounts of what happened 10 years ago, acknowledging their roles and the damage done. These would be notarized and kept by my lawyer. Second, they would individually and publicly correct the record with everyone they'd lied to about me. Third, they would attend therapy, both individually and as a family, with a therapist of my choosing. And if we refuse? My father asked, his jaw clenched. A muscle twitched in his cheek, a familiar sign of his anger that I remembered from childhood. Then every person in your lives gets a copy of my document. Your friends, your co-workers, your in-laws, everyone. I leaned back in my chair, the threat hanging between us like a drawn weapon. That's blackmail, he sputtered, face reddening. His fist came down on the arm of the couch, making my mother flinch beside him. No, I corrected him. It's consequences. The word tasted bitter but satisfying on my tongue. The call ended shortly after. I sat in the silence of my home, emotionally drained but oddly calm. The hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside were the only noises breaking the stillness. I sent the document as promised, then turned off my phone. They needed time to process what had happened, to understand that I wasn't the same person they'd discarded. The next morning, I woke to dozens of missed calls and messages. My mother begging me to reconsider. My father threatening legal action. My sisters divided. Vanessa and Diane reluctantly agreeing to my terms. Caitlin calling me cruel and vindictive. E's message was different. Simple. Director, you ruined my life too. The words glowed on my screen, an accusation that mirrored my own. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded evidence of E's application fraud to the school district's HR department from an anonymous email. It wasn't difficult. I had copies of her application materials from our conversations as Melissa, where she'd admitted to fabricating credentials. By afternoon, she was calling me in a panic, saying she'd been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Why are you doing this? She sobbed over the phone, her voice breaking. I could hear her gasping for breath between words, the sound of someone drowning in consequences. Actions have consequences, I replied. You're learning that now. I ended the call, feeling a cold satisfaction that quickly faded to emptiness. Over the next week, the family fractured further. My mother and Diane agreed to my terms completely. My father refused, his pride preventing him from admitting his role. Vanessa wavered, torn between her husband's insistence that they shouldn't give in to extortion and her fear of what I might reveal. Caitlin blocked my number again. E lost her job and her boyfriend after I anonymously sent him screenshots of conversations where she'd belittled him to Melissa. I watched it all unfold with detached interest. The family that had once presented a united front against me was now crumbling under the weight of their own secrets and lies. Each morning, I checked my email for updates, tracking the fallout like a scientist observing an experiment. Dr. Winters was concerned when I told her what I'd done. This isn't healing, she said during our session, her eyes searching mine. The afternoon sun streamed through her office window, casting long shadows across the floor. This is punishment. They deserve to be punished, I replied, fingers digging into the armrests of my chair. The leather creaked under my grip. Perhaps, she conceded. But what do you deserve? Her voice was gentle but probing. The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. You deserve peace, she said gently. Does this bring you peace? She gestured to the folder I'd brought, containing printouts of my family's panicked messages. I didn't have an answer. The question lingered in my mind as I drove home, the familiar route passing in a blur of traffic lights and street signs. 2 weeks after the video call, my mother reached out again. She and Diane had complied with all my terms. They'd written their accounts, contacted everyone they'd lied to, and scheduled appointments with the therapist I'd selected. My father, she explained, had moved out. He couldn't accept what was happening. The thought of my parents separating after nearly 40 years of marriage should have felt like a victory, but instead left me feeling hollow. He still thinks you're wrong, she said, voice thin and tired. That you're being vindictive. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the weight of everything that had happened. I am being vindictive, I acknowledged, but that doesn't make me wrong. I paced my living room as we spoke, unable to sit still with the nervous energy coursing through me. She hesitated. Vanessa wants to meet with you, in person, just the two of you. The request hung in the air between us. I considered this. Vanessa had been the least cruel during the initial accusation. She hadn't called me names or sent hateful messages. She'd simply disappeared from my life. Why? I asked. She wants to explain herself, without everyone else around. My mother's voice held a note of hope that I wasn't ready to embrace. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, a public place, neutral ground. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where I could see the door. The scent of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air as I waited, watching the door. My stomach churned with anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to touch the coffee I'd ordered. Vanessa looked older than she had on the video call, more tired. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail rather than the careful style she'd worn on screen. She hugged me when she arrived, and I let her, though I didn't return the embrace. My arms hung stiffly at my sides as she wrapped hers around me. Thank you for coming, she said as we sat down with our drinks, steam rising between us. She wrapped her hands around her mug as if seeking warmth. Why did you want to meet? I asked, not interested in small talk. The coffee shop buzzed with conversation around us, providing a buffer of white noise. She took a deep breath. I wanted to tell you that I understand what you're doing and why. Her eyes met mine directly, unflinching. This wasn't what I expected. You do? I leaned back slightly, studying her face for signs of deception. When E first made her accusation, I didn't believe it, she admitted, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. But Mom and Dad were so convinced, and everyone just went along with it, including me. I failed you. Her voice cracked on the last words. Her honesty surprised me. Then why didn't you ever reach out? In all these years, I kept my voice low, aware of the other customers nearby. Because admitting I was wrong meant admitting I let my brother suffer for nothing, she said, her voice breaking. It was easier to pretend you didn't exist than face what I'd done. A tear slipped down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. For the first time since I'd begun my plan, I felt something crack in my resolve. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. But recognition. Recognition that they had been living with their choices too, just in a very different way than I had. I've complied with everything you asked, Vanessa continued. But I want you to know I'm not doing it because I'm afraid of your document. I'm doing it because it's right. She reached across the table as if to touch my hand, then thought better of it and withdrew. After meeting with Vanessa, I found myself at a crossroads. Part of me wanted to continue with my plan, to watch as they all suffered the consequences of their actions. But another part, a part I thought had died years ago, wondered if there might be another way forward. The satisfaction of revenge was fading, leaving behind a hollow feeling that no amount of their suffering seemed to fill. I discussed it with Dr. Winters during our next session. Revenge feels satisfying in the moment, she said, sunlight from her office window casting patterns on the floor, but it rarely brings lasting peace. Her voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who had seen this pattern play out before. So I should just forgive them? I asked incredulously. The very idea made my stomach turn. No, she replied. Forgiveness is earned, not given. But there's a difference between holding people accountable and destroying them. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine. The question is, what do you want your life to be about? Revenge or recovery? I thought about E, now unemployed and isolated. About my father, separated from my mother after decades of marriage. About the family torn apart, again, because of my actions. The power I'd felt initially was fading, replaced by a weariness that settled deep in my bones. I don't know if I can stop, I admitted. I've been planning this for so long. The revenge had become a project, a purpose, something that got me out of bed in the morning. The question isn't whether you can stop, Dr. Winters said. It's whether continuing serves you or harms you. She handed me a tissue, and only then did I realize tears were streaming down my face. I didn't have an answer for that either. The question followed me home, echoing in my mind as I moved through my evening routine. It was still there when I woke the next morning, persistent and unavoidable. The next day, I received an unexpected visitor, my father, standing on my doorstep, looking older and smaller than I remembered. His shoulders were hunched, his face lined with stress. The confident man who had once dominated every room was gone, replaced by someone who seemed diminished. Can I come in? He asked, his voice gruff. He didn't meet my eyes, instead looking past me into the house. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered my home slowly, looking around at the life I'd built without him, the motorcycle helmet on the shelf, the Lego models displayed in the living room, the framed diploma on the wall. His eyes lingered on each item, as if trying to piece together the years he'd missed. Nice place, he commented, hands in his pockets. He stood awkwardly in the center of my living room, a stranger in my space. What do you want? I asked, not interested in pleasantries. I remained standing, arms crossed over my chest. He sighed heavily. Your mother thinks I should apologize. Do what you asked. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood. But you don't want to. It wasn't a question. I knew my father's pride, his inability to admit when he was wrong. I don't like being forced into anything, he admitted. Never have. The stubbornness that had once seemed like strength now just looked like weakness. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each second of the standoff. You know, he finally said, when E first told us what happened, I didn't believe it either. This was news to me. My heart skipped a hit at this unexpected revelation. You didn't? I uncrossed my arms, studying his face for signs of deception. He shook his head. Didn't seem like you. But your mother was so upset, and E was so convincing. I went along with it. Figured if I was wrong, no harm done. If I was right, he trailed off, unable to complete the thought. If you were right, you'd protected a child from a predator. I finished for him. The bitterness in my voice was unmistakable. He nodded. I never considered there was a third option, that E was lying, and we'd destroy your life for nothing. The admission hung in the air between us, too little and far too late. I'm not going to write some confession or go to therapy, he continued stubbornly, but I am sorry, for what it's worth. He finally met my eyes, his own red-rimmed and tired. It wasn't worth much after 10 years, but it was something. The first genuine apology any of them had offered, not wrapped in excuses or expectations, just a simple acknowledgement of wrong. What happens now? He asked. His voice held a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. I don't know, I answered honestly, and for the first time in years, that was true. The path forward was no longer clear. After my father left, I sat in my garage, surrounded by the evidence of my revenge, the printouts, the recordings, the carefully constructed plan to make them all suffer as I had suffered. The overhead light cast harsh shadows, making everything look stark and cold. I thought about what Dr. Winters had said about bringing peace. The truth was, it didn't. The initial satisfaction had faded, leaving behind a hollow feeling. They were hurting now, yes, but so was I. Still, always. I picked up my phone and texted E. Meet me tomorrow. We need to talk. My thumb hovered over the send button for a long moment before pressing it. She agreed immediately, probably fearing what else I might do if she refused. We met at a park, sitting on opposite ends of a bench. The spring air was cool, birds singing in the trees above us. She looked terrible, eyes red from crying, hair unwashed. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, as if she'd lost weight rapidly. I lost everything, she said without preamble. My job, Trevor, my friends. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of someone beyond tears. I lost everything too, I replied. 10 years ago. The words weren't accusatory, just a statement of fact. She flinched. So this is payback. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, unable to look at me. Yes, I admitted. It was. The past tense hung between us, a small but significant shift. Was? She looked up, confusion and the faintest hint of hope in her eyes. I sighed, looking out at the park where families were playing, living their normal lives. Lives I'd once hoped to have. Children laughed as they chased each other across the grass. A couple walked hand in hand along the path, normal people living normal lives, untouched by the kind of betrayal that had defined mine. Why did you lie about me? I asked. The question I'd wanted to ask for a decade. It came out softer than I expected, more more tired than angry. He was quiet for a long moment. A breeze rustled the leaves above us, casting shifting patterns of sunlight across the bench. I was 15 and struggling, she finally said. My parents were fighting all the time. I wasn't fitting in at school. I had this dream about you. It wasn't even sexual at first, just confusing. But I told my friend Amber about it, and she said it sounded like what happened to her cousin. She convinced me it must have been a repressed memory. Her words came faster now, as if she'd rehearsed this explanation many times. So you accused me of SAU because of a dream and a friend's amateur psychology? The absurdity of it made me want to laugh and scream simultaneously. My life destroyed because of a teenager's confused dream and peer pressure. Once I said it out loud, I couldn't take it back, she continued, voice trembling. Everyone believed me instantly. They were so supportive, so protective. I became the center of attention, the brave survivor. And then years passed, and the lie just calcified, became part of who I was. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Until last month, I watched a squirrel dart across the path in front of us, pausing to look around before continuing its journey. She nodded. Until I couldn't keep lying to myself anymore. Until I realized what I'd done, what I'd taken from you. Her voice broke on the last words, genuine remorse evident in every syllable. We sat in silence, two people whose lives had been derailed by a teenager's lie. The park continued its activities around us, dogs barking, children playing, life going on as it always did. I can't give you back those years, she finally said, but I am sorry, truly. She turned to face me fully, her eyes meeting mine directly for the first time. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the monster I'd built up in my mind, but a flawed, broken person, like me. The realization didn't bring forgiveness, but it did bring clarity. Continuing to destroy her wouldn't heal me. It would just create more pain, more damage, more waste. I'm going to stop, I said, the decision forming as I spoke the words. No more revenge, no more destruction. The words felt right as they left my mouth, like setting down a heavy burden I'd carried for too long. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Her shoulders sagged, tension visibly leaving her body. Don't thank me, I said sharply. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, because I don't want to be this person anymore. The person consumed by bitterness, defined by what was done to him rather than by his own choices. As I drove home, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. Might never be. But a letting go. A recognition that continuing down this path of revenge would only keep me tethered to the past, to the pain, to them. The road stretched before me, familiar yet somehow different, as if I was seeing it through new eyes. I called my mother that evening. I'm canceling my demands, I told her. You don't have to do therapy or write confessions or anything else. My voice was calm, resolved. Why? She asked, confusion evident in her voice. I could hear the television playing softly in the background, the mundane soundtrack of an ordinary evening. Because it's not helping me, I said honestly. It's just creating more pain. I looked around my living room, at the home I'd built for myself, and realized I wanted it to be a place of peace, not a command center for revenge. Does this mean you forgive us? The hope in her voice was palpable, almost desperate. No, I said firmly. I don't forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I'm choosing to stop punishing you. The distinction was important, not for them, but for me. What about reconciliation? The family dinner? She pressed, eager to move forward, to pretend everything could be normal again. I'm not ready for that, I told her. I need time, space, to figure out what I want, what I wanted my life to be, without the shadow of revenge hanging over it. That night, I deleted all the evidence I'd gathered, the recordings, the transcripts, the dossiers. I erased Alex Jensen and Melissa from existence, closing their accounts and removing all traces. With each file deleted, each account closed, I felt lighter, as if physically removing weights that had been dragging me down. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Not healed, the wound was still there, a decade deep, but no longer festering. The sun streamed through my bedroom window, casting warm patches on the floor. I made coffee and sat on my back porch, watching birds visit the feeder I'd hung last summer but barely noticed until now. I texted Vanessa, thank you for meeting with me. I'm stopping everything. Not for them, for me. The message was simple but honest, a small step toward whatever came next. Her response came quickly. I understand. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to be part of your life again. No pressure, just an open door. The words glowed on my screen, not demanding or expectant, just offering possibility. An open door, not a demand or an expectation, just a possibility. For the first time in 10 years, I allowed myself to consider that possibility, not with eagerness or even hope, but with a cautious acknowledgement that perhaps, someday, there might be a way forward that didn't require either complete estrangement or false forgiveness. I didn't know what that path looked like yet, but for now, it was enough to know I was choosing it for myself, not out of revenge, not out of obligation, but because after 10 years of letting their actions define my life, I was finally ready to define it for myself.